Okay, so yeah, let's get started. Lovely to see everyone here. And as you know, we'll have two talks today on the topic of Xenophon's Economicus. Um, the first will be by Flavia Palmieri from Sapienza, University of Rome, in the Department of Philosophy. And she'll be talking about talking on the topic of philosopher-oikonomos, Xenophon's Economicus, and Philodemus of Gadara's Epicurean critique. Thanks very much, Flavia. I'll hand over to you, and I'll be sharing the handout in the chat.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everyone. In particular, thank you, Emily, and the IXS for inviting me for organizing this colloquium. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, today I will examine the figure of the philosopher in relation to economic practice by placing Xenophon's Economicus in dialogue with Philodemus of Gadara's Epicurean critique in his Peri-Oikonomias. The question in the title is deliberately intended to raise a problem. Can there be such a person as a philosopher who is also, in some meaningful sense, an oikonomos, as differently imagined by Xenophon and Philodemus? Let me begin with just a brief disclaimer concerning Xenophon's Economicus. I shall not try to decide here how we should understand the relation between Socrates and Lysimachus, whether they represent two opposed models or one grounded in Socratic self-sufficiency and the other in Lysimachian wealth, or whether they are complementary, namely Lysimachus is like Xenophon's attempt to show how Socratic virtue can be translated into practical and economic activity. My focus, however, will be more specific. I shall approach the problem in three steps. First, what figure of the philosopher emerges in Xenophon Economicus text, litera itself? Second, how Philodemus reads and criticizes that figure through the lens of Epicurean philosophy. And third, what alternative model of the philosopher-oikonomos he sets against it. My main claim is the following. Philodemus treats both Socrates and Lysimachus as critical points of reference, but regards them as inadequate in opposite ways. Socrates is too radical, too poor, and ultimately proposes a way of life that is impracticable. Yet he also has the correct anti-crematistic instinct. He subordinates wealth to use, rejects unlimited accumulation, and disciplines desire. Ischomachus, by contrast, is not considered greedy. Philodemus recognizes that he presents himself as a kalos kagathos, whose wealth serves gods, friends, and city. Yet, for Philodemus, he remains too technical, too hierarchical, and too absorbed in acquisition to model the philosopher's attitude towards oikonomia. Against both figures, Philodemus develops an Epicurean oikonomia appropriate only to the philosopher. Neither Socratic poverty nor Nicomachean managerial expertise, but a measured, tranquil, and philosophically subordinated administration of property, guided by metron, ataraxia, autarkeia, asphaleia, and philia, but in Epicurean sense. Let me begin from a small but revealing lexical fact. In Xenophon's Economicus, the explicit reference to the philosopher appears only once, at Economicus 16.9, when Socrates says to Ischomachus, and I quote text number 1 from the text number 1 of the handout, I think the first thing I should be glad to learn, for that is especially a philosopher's way, is how I might cultivate the land if I want to get a maximum yield of barley and wheat from it. The line is striking because Socrates quotes the desire to learn agriculture philosophical. More precisely, the expression refers to Socrates' wish to learn gladly or with pleasure. Eideos manthanein is what properly belongs to the philosopher. This desire, by the way, this desire to learn is then given a specific content, namely the technical and the rational how of agricultural practice. As some scholars have exposed, it may sound ironic, or it may show that agriculture and household management are fields in which moral principles can be applied to everyday life. In any case, it is worth noting that the only passage in which the philosopher is mentioned concerns the pleasure in learning agriculture, and I would say precisely against agriculture, Philodemus puts forward one of the sharpest criticisms, even if not very long, as we will see. More generally, in Xenophon, the dominant honorific vocabulary from a philological point of view is not that of philosophy, but that of kalokagathia. Ischomachus is repeatedly described as kalos kagathos, morally excellent, practically competent, and able to teach Socrates about the oikos. But he is not called a philosophos. In Philodemus, by contrast, the central question becomes what is appropriate for the philosophers in matters of oikonomia. The key figure is no longer the gentleman oikonomos, the crematistes, but the Epicurean sage who must relate to wealth without losing the telos of life, i.e., ataraxia. The key points of Philodemus' positions are set out with particular clarity at the beginnings of the pars construents of his treatise, following his criticism of Xenophon and Theophrastus, where Philodemus states his aim clearly, and I read text number 2 at the end out. We shall discuss then not how one can live well at home, but what aptitude one must take up both with regard to the acquisition and the preservation of wealth, concerning which property management and the property management expert are in fact conceived specifically. And we shall do so, and I skip, discussing the acquisition of property that is appropriate for the philosopher, not just for anyone. Well, there is for the philosopher a measure of wealth that, following the founders of the school, we have passed down in the treatise on wealth and so on. So 3 points matter here. First, Philodemus restricts the discussion to thesis and phylogeny, acquisition and preservation, rather than the broader Xenophontian field of use, education, command, and organization of the oikos. Secondly, he makes the philosopher the addressee, not the crematistes or aristocratic manager. Thirdly, he introduces a metron Pluto, not poverty, but a rational and effective limit within which wealth can be useful without anxiety. This shift in addressee is tied to a different telos of oikonomia. In Xenophon, the end is auxent on oikon, typical of the crematistes, even if Xenophon presents it ethically. This is clear when Critobulus says that the agathos oikonomos can enlarge the household by creating greater wealth in Oeconomicus 1:4, text 3a, or in text 3b, Oeconomicus 7:15, when Ischomachus says that sophrosiune in husband and wife requires preserving property and adding to it in the best possible way. For Philodemus, by contrast, oikonomia no longer aims at increasing possessions, but at the philosopher's proper disposition towards wealth. Thus, he redefines the right management of wealth as this, and this text 4, I quote, in not feeling distressed about what one loses and in not trapping oneself on treadmills because of an obsessive zeal concerning the more and the less. And of course, this is also the lens through which he criticizes Xenophon at the beginning of his treatise, as is text 5b. Philodemus' text roughly corresponds to Oeconomicus 1:2-3, the text 5a, which I have paired with Philodemus' critique, where Critobulus defines the agathos oikonomos through eu oikein. For Philodemus, Xenophon is effectively understood as oikonomein, as gaining many riches. Philodemus instead takes eu as beneficial and blessed, shifting the framework from productivity to well-being. He does not deny that the oikonomia involves acquisition and preservation, but what he rejects is the identification of its telos with acquiring more, even virtuously. For the philosopher, the telos must be the atarakon oikonomia, as Philodemus calls it. In short, Xenophon investigates whether oikonomia is a techne or episteme and what its ergon is. Philodemus asks what relation to ctesis and phylake is appropriate for the philosopher who wants to live good, in Epicurean terms. The issue is not whether oikonomia can be thought, but whether it can be subordinated to philosophy, namely to a conduct of life free from disturbance. Let us now examine Philodemus' criticism of Xenophon. It is generally acknowledged that Philodemus opposes the early economic tradition explicit Xenophon and the Oeconomicae he attributed to Theophrastus, which conceived of oikonomia as a techne grounded in a set of practical and empirical precepts. I would argue, however, that Philodemus' criticism is directed not only at Xenophon's technical conception of oikonomia in general, but more specifically at the distinct positions articulated first by Socrates and then by Ischomachus, as though they represent two different conceptions. At the same time, he attributes Ischomachus' indication as the position of Xenophon himself. Philodemus first attacks the Socrates of the opening conversation with Critobulus, in particular the section 122-8, which I have partly reported in text 6. His criticism has two aspects. First, Socrates violates ordinary linguistic usage, as is text 7a. He called by his masters, certain householders slaves, poor people rich people poor, without sufficient qualification. Although this metaphorical inversion is evocative, for Philodemus, such inversions threaten the clarity of prolepses. That's the reason why Philodemus tries to redefine economic terms, as we will see later. Secondly, Philodemus rejects the Socratic claim that a very small property, the famous 5 minis, is sufficient for living well. It's text 7b. Here, he reformulates Economicus 248 in Epicurean terms, introducing the language of necessary and natural needs, absent from Xenophon, and treating prosperity in life like something empty when pursued without measure. Yet, he rejects Socrates' position as impracticable and contrary to reason, aporon to ergo kai to no. 5 minis are not enough to secure the stable life of a philosopher. Still, I would suggest the disagreement is not absolute. Socrates' claim that wealth depends on use, his rejection of unlimited accumulation, and his discipline of desire are close to Epicurean ethics. Epicurus too praises satisfaction with little, while not despising wealth when useful for security. Philodemus therefore rejects not Socrates' anti-crematistic instinct, but its radical and impracticable form. It's like if Socrates has the right intuition, but not the right Epicurean measure. If Socrates is too poor, so Ischomachus is too expert and too busy. Philodemus reads him as Xenophon's model of a man practicing property management and moral excellence. Indeed, as Socrates' teacher in both respects, as text 7b at the end shows the didaskalos. In Xenophon, Ischomachus' wealth is ethically and politically coded. At Economicus 11.8.9, he says that he acts lawfully in order to acquire wealth that increases nobly, plutukalos auxomeno. He also says that it is pleasant to honor the gods magnificently, help friends, and adorn the city through money. This model binds wealth to piety, friendship, civic benefaction, bodily health, military preparedness, and agricultural labor. Ischomachus rationalizes wealth through virtue. His oikonomia belongs to an ethical political form of life. Philodemus' objection concerned the cost of this unification. Ischomachus' oikonomia becomes too comprehensive. It includes the training of the wife, the disciples of slaves, supervision of fields, early rising, continuous inspections, increase of goods, and bodily discipline. Oikonomia risks becoming a totalizing regime of command. The first issues Philodemus arises concern the wife. We can see text 8a. Philodemus questions whether a wife is necessary or useful for philosopher-oikonomia and more generally for the peaceful life. He is skeptical of the Xenophontian view that the increase or decrease of the estate depends on the wife's role and on her education by the husband. Such a claim is, in his terms, false, pseudos, naive, or at least unclear, adelon. His later criticism of Theophrastus confirms this point, because there Philodemus denies that a wife is necessary for happiness. Later on, he also criticized the need to educate slaves. What is at stake is the whole Ischomacheian model of oikonomia. For Philodemus, economic life must be subordinated to Epicurean precepts and to the regulation of desire and fears, not to domestic hierarchy or pedagogical command. The second issue is agriculture, which I think is the most direct reply to Xenophon 16:9, the text 1 of the handout. There, Socrates calls the philosopher's way the learning with pleasure in relation to technical rational how of agriculture. Philodemus answers in text 8b that the georgike techne derives from idea empeiria, personal experience, not from philosophy. Agricultural tasks are neither a necessary object of the philosopher's knowledge nor suitable to be carried out through his advice, and for this reason he will not discuss it any further. He does not deny that agriculture or property management can be useful. He denies that the philosopher must become an expert in them. As we can see in text 9, he distinguishes professional techne from modest practical competence sufficient for one's needs. We may make bread for ourselves, though expert baker exists. Similarly, we can procure and preserve what is necessary, though there are experts in wealth acquisition. Such experts may exist, and the sage may use expert servants, but the true philosopher should not become such a producer. The sage may be called a good money-maker, as text 10 shows, but only if good money-maker is understood according to the right prolepsis, one who acquires and preserves wealth according to what is advantageous in Epicurean terms. But if the term means someone who acquires many possessions with skills and expertise, even lawfully and without dishonor, then that person is not the sage, because such acquisition brings more sufferings than pleasures. The philosopher-oikonomos is therefore not an expert crematistes. He has enough practical competence not to act randomly, but he does not organize his life around technical maximization. The perspective also encompasses the acceptance of agriculture, but only on condition that the philosopher does not deal with it directly. As we see in text 11, and I quote, cultivating the land oneself in a manner involving work with one's own hand is wretched. Cultivating it through others, if one is a landowner, is appropriate for the good man. Therefore, end of quoting, he allows the use of experts and workers, but not direct agricultural labor by the philosopher himself. It is not explicitly stated, but in Philodemus' eyes, Ischomachus can be at most a servant of the philosopher. Philodemus also accepts, that's the reason why I say that his critique in that regard is very sharp. Philodemus also accepts income from properties rented to tenants and from slaves who possess skills or arts that are not unseemly. And this clearly shows his attempt to adapt Epicurean precepts to the Roman aristocratic context he addresses. Yet, continuing the text 11, these sources of income are only second and third, because, and I quote, the first and noblest thing is to receive back thankful gift, with all reverence in return for philosophical discourses shared with men capable of understanding them. Philosophy becomes a form of metadidonia, sharing. Gratitude becomes legitimate support. Income is embedded in philia, not in market competition or civic ambition. The crucial point, however, is that the same passage ends by identifying the principal activity leading to profit and to preservation of possessions lies in the management of desires and fears. Sorry, just a moment. Yeah? Sì, scusi?
Quando prevedete il trasloco?
E a breve, guardi, mi scusi che sono in un convegno. Comunque entro la settimana o la prossima. Va bene?
Perché arriva
Certo.
a maggio, quindi...
Certo, va bene, grazie, arrivederci. I'm so sorry, really, I'm sorry. I would say that the crucial point is that the same passage ends by identifying the principal activity leading to profit and to the preservation of possessions lies in the management of desires and fears. This is the Epicurean center of oikonomia. Even if the ideal philosopher-oikonomos would be the life of Epicurus, everyone can oikonomei in a philosophical way, even acquiring incomes from other activities, since the decisive activity remains internal and philosophical. The administration of property begins with the administration of the self. Then remains of oikonomia for the philosopher. If oikonomia means the technical expertise of a specialist who possesses practical rules for maximizing profit, even in a virtuous way, then the philosopher is not an oikonomos. But if oikonomein means the ability not to be excessively concerned with the more and the less, to know what one needs, to recognize the proper measure of wealth, and to trust that nature provides what is necessary while philoi may offer material support when needed, then the philosopher can indeed be an oikonomos, living a life that is moderate and communal, bios metriostekai koinos, says Philodemus. Philodemus is nevertheless not utopian. He recognizes the human limits of the philosopher and gives practical advice, as text 12 shows. One should dedicate some time to inspections, to giving assistance to some workers, without thinking that this takes anything away from philosophy, because it is just as shameful to be too involved in these practices as it is to do nothing at all. End of quote. He recommends consulting more experienced friends, discussing the acquisition of slaves with those who know better, avoiding reckless spending in pursuit of vain images and hopes, from which even philosophers are not immune. So he even concedes in the text 12 that some Xenophontian and Theophrastian views may be borrowed if useful. The result is a middle position. The philosopher should not be a professional expert in acquisition, but neither should he be helpless, careless, or dependent on chance. He needs prudence, friends, and a limited measure of wealth. Above all, he must calculate pleasures and pains so that economic activity does not become more burdensome than the security it is meant to provide. And then I conclude by return to the title, A Philosopher-oikonomos. Xenophon offers two powerful figures. Socrates shows that wealth must be subordinated to use, that self-sufficiency is more important than possession, and that the rich person enslaved by passions is truly poor. Ischomachus shows that wealth can be embedded in a noble form of life, linked to gods, friends, agriculture, order, and care. Philodemus rejects both as models for the philosopher, yet borrows from both. From Socrates, self-regulation and the critique of unlimited desire. From Ischomachus, practical attention to property and the possibility of using wealth for others. What he eliminates is radical poverty on one side and totalizing economic expertise on the other. Philodemus' critique of Xenophon is not merely negative, since he transforms the economic tradition. Oeconomia becomes neither household technocracy nor ascetic renunciation, but a practical extension of Epicurean ethics. Agriculture, property, and technical expertise may be useful in their proper place, but philosophy alone determines their measure. The philosopher may be an oikonomos only if oikonomia itself has first become philosophical in Epicurean terms. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful, wonderful talk. Let me open the floor to questions, comments. Let's start with Thornton.
Hi,
Flavia.
Thornton.
Thank you for the paper. So you picked up the Philodemian criticism of whether or not a wife is necessary for one's well-being. And I wonder, I mean, since that's something you find both in the Theophrastus and in the Xenophon, in both of them, that pairing is sanctioned by the god. I mean, it's sort of hardwired within an understanding of a kind of, I guess I would say, like a civic religion or something like that. Does Philodemus engage the question of spousal relationships within the framework of theology at all, or is he just assuming that that's kind of a polite civic religion that no one really believes in when we say that the God made man and women complementary and so forth?
Yeah, thank you very much. No, I would just directly respond that he doesn't take care in this treatise of gods, but this is because I would imagine that he doesn't consider any kind of theological framework regarding the conception of wife and parenting and so on, because of the Epicurean conception of theology, where actually gods exist, like in the Epistola ad Menicius. Gods exist, but they don't care of us. So they are totally indifferent to us. Even if from formal perspective, Epicurus and Epicureans later on always gave monies or for riti for theological for all the common necessities, the common way of showing to the temples, going to the temples, and so on, building states, statues, and so on. So, from a formal point of view, by the way, they follow the traditional religion, but from a philosophical perspective, they don't care, totally don't care, because they are Afterton and Macarion. So Macariotes and Afterton, and they are Afterton. They are the most happy atoms, actually, because by the way they are aggregate of atoms, but they are so perfect that they don't interact, they don't share anything with human being. And that's, I think, the reason why he doesn't need to justify why he's no more interested in this kind of relations that, according to the tradition, are teleological, justified, or, by the way, preserved, let's say.
Great, thank you.
I don't know if I...
Again, partially I was wondering just within the treatise if he addresses this, but I think you're right to say that more broadly within the Epicurean corpus, you're getting a theology that explains why spousal relationships are not divinely sanctioned.
Yeah. But by the way, I will try to find it. So in the treatise, just like this, I would say no. He doesn't consider so there isn't an analysis about that, nor a reference. But I will search with this lens.
Great.
if there
Thank you.
is something from a philological point of view, maybe there are some possible references. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Any further questions? I wonder if I could ask you, you were talking about the shift from the productive focus of Ascomicus to thinking about well-being in the way that the Epicureans think about it. A question from ignorance. Yeah, do we have any response to Socrates and memorabilia and the idea, and I think it's broader in Xenophon as well, the idea of well-being and happiness that comes from social activity, from like building up this sort of project in service of the polis, ultimately in service of the divine, like the order of the household. This idea that I guess comes through quite clearly when virtue is talking in memorabilia, and the sense of human connectedness and the satisfaction and even happiness that comes from working together collaboratively on various things. Or does the fact that you want to be, undisturbed, does this mean that this kind of social aspect that one might also have seen if there were an interest in the spousal relationship, that it's simply irrelevant for the Epicureans? I mean, I'd love to, yeah.
Thank you.
Engagement with this side of things, and I would say more generally with Xenophon's preoccupation with philia and these the ties that connect human beings.
Yeah, well, thank you, Emily. It's a huge question actually, because the framework is very large, and I would say that there is a little difference between Epicurus in general and Philodemus, more specific, because regarding the importance of the context, the social context, actually, Epicurus follows the main, as for the theology, the main characteristic of an agathos, kalos kagathos. While for Philodemus, the kalos kagathos is no more, how can I say, the addressee is another society, is the Roman society, is the society of the Roman aristocratic, the follower of Lucius Calpur Piso, was the master, let's say, the owner, the big landowner, actually, who host Philodemus. And so the addressee of the perioeconomias, Philodemian perioeconomias, is actually a society strictly aristocratic, composed of landowners. And so that's the reason why he slightly changed the way in which he understands wealth. If for Epicurus the wealth is considered as what is necessary barely to survive, because there is a social environment, which are the philoi, which is the society, which are all people who are Epicurean, in sense that they follow the precepts of Epicurus. They, by the way, constitute a net for the most important net of the Epicurean, while the social net of Philodemus are actually, or in particular, they are the Roman aristocracy, and therefore changed also, the telos, because changed the addressee, and I would say that what he tries to do is to adapt Epicurean precepts to this kind of society. And so the Kalokagatia changed because they are more in general following a kind of social, how can I say, position. They are different in order to be a good akalos kagathos. And in particular, we can say that's the reason why also Philodemus says some practical advices like, okay to be landowner, but if there is someone who do that for you in a practical way, or okay gaining wealth, but from rent or from the labor actually of the servants. And this is a very different, by the way, position according to who the kalos kagatos should be, no? But Epicurus would not say that. This is I try in short to make three different answers.
Wow, no,
I
that's
don't know if
absolutely fascinating. Yeah, thank you so much. That was extremely
Thank you.
helpful. Do
Thank
we
you.
have
Thank
any
you,
any
Dani.
further question, or perhaps at this point I think at this point we'll shift to our next speaker. But let me just say again, thank you very much, Flavia. Wonderful,
Thank
wonderful
you.
topic, and really interesting how he, yeah, kind of borrows from both the Schomachus and Socrates, but then also really rejecting some very central aspects of their their approach, like Socrates on poverty. That just seems like such a major thing.
Yeah,
Xenophon.
and also the fact that Socrates is considered one a direct addressee. Actually, it's a direct yes, and Theophrastus Aristotle too. Absolutely, yeah, really, there converse a lot of different perspectives.
And can I just
Thank
ask,
you.
is this going to be
Yeah.
part of is this part of can you tell us what this is part of, this piece of work, this paper? Could you just briefly,
Yeah,
just very
yeah,
briefly?
sure. I'm writing a little monography on Epicurean oikonomene.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. Wonderful.
Thank
Okay, so
you.
at this point, let's move to our second speaker, Carol Atack, zooming in from Newnham College at the University of Cambridge. And she'll be talking to us about, and let's see if I can pronounce it correctly this time, masculinity and care for the environment in Xenophon's Economicus. Thank you, Carol.
Thanks. And I should say that this is something of a work in progress, and I appended a big chunk of the argument while thinking about it yesterday, so it may be a bit all over the place. I don't have a handout, but I do have some slides which I can't share. It says sharing not turned on. I've sent you a request.
Yeah, sorry. I think it might be working now. Am I right?
It is working. It is working now. Let me share. And is that going to do has that done the right thing?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Sorry about that. So this is eventually going to be a chapter in a volume on gender and the environment in the classical world. But it's turned into an opportunity for me to work out some ideas about Xenophon's thought and opening up a perhaps broader question about ancient and indeed modern conceptions of masculinity. And as the paper unfolds, you'll see that we return to areas of masculine activity, agriculture and hunting, which seem to play differing roles in the construction of masculinity, and Xenophon's thought seems to provide a good way of thinking about that. So I'll be using some of his case studies from embedded in the Economicus to show how Xenophon constructs a form of hegemonic masculinity, to use Ray Connell's concept, which seems to be tied to the Greek ideal of kalogathia, the personal excellence of the elite man. And the connection or even identity between masculinity and leadership is, I think, core to Xenophon's thought and often foregrounded in the large literature on Xenophon and leadership. But I wondered whether tackling it using some critical theories of gender might help shed some light. So what I want to explore is how Xenophon is interested in the way that masculine authority is constructed and evidenced through the ordering of the natural environment, which of course is part of the divine cosmos, and both the initial ordering and then the responsible management, the epimeleia, that if we follow Foucault, is an important central concept in Xenophon's model of how to be a good man. So this model of self-management seems to extend to how one should operate in relation to the natural environment. But I think it also raises an issue about perhaps a simple opposition between the masculine exterior and the feminine interior spaces, and complicates those because masculine authority ultimately dominates both as a generative power. And we can also, and I'll try and bring this in later, this is the bit that I'm still thinking through, is how the concept of chora, of disordered and unorganized space, works through this. So our principal characters here will be the two Achaemenid leaders, Cyrus the elder and the younger, at least the versions of them conjured by Xenophon and voiced by Socrates in the Oeconomicus, and then explored by Xenophon in the Cyropaedia. And in the longer version of the paper, I then run through how this plays out in Xenophon's traversing unmanaged ground in the Anabasis, but we're not going to have time to do that today. So let's start with the two Cyruses and their gardening activity. Xenophon's brief account of the gardens of Cyrus the Younger in chapter 4 of the Oeconomicus, and Cyrus's direct participation in their planting and management, underpins a broader claim that skill in farming and the good stewardship of agricultural land is an aspect of personal excellence, which might be seen as important as military skill. It provides a route to achieving personal excellence and also to flourishing, not just of the plants, but of oneself. And so I'm looking at how this works out in this chapter in the Oeconomicus. So let's see, does that no? Hold on. I've started at the wrong end of my slides. That's why that hasn't worked. So these are the kind of theoretical things that I'll be, I was just talking about, and we'll get to some of the kind of matters arising and how the ideal of the hoplite farmer and indeed the American farmer might play into this, how this might make a response to worries about toxic masculinity, forms of masculinity that don't help construct society and aren't helpful to the furtherance of community and shared norms and values, and also perhaps socio-biological and evolutionary psychological ideas about masculinity. So as I say, focused on two different activities, hunting and farming, as discourses of masculinity. So to go to the first text, In the Economicus, as we know, Xenophon reports a conversation between Socrates and Critobulus, the young adult son of his friend Crito, on the topic of estate management. The young man is setting up his own household and perceives a need to improve his skills, and Socrates gives him some advice. And I think it's interesting that we see a lot of parallels throughout the chapter I'm focusing on between farming as an economic activity, the relationship with humans and land, an aesthetic element of virtue production produced by working with the land, and also the capacity of the land, when ordered and managed, to generate thauма. So the estate manager can echo the monarch who cements his status through the construction of buildings and infrastructure, a familiar figure from ancient historiography. So these topics all intersect in the first case study, looking at first the elder Cyrus and his concerns about the management of land. And at this point, he's interested in how his subordinates manage the land that he has entrusted to them, that they should take good care in doing so, that they should do so actively. So in this passage, it should be energon, it needs to be a live piece of work, and that if they do this well, they receive additional adornment. There's more cosmos through the gifts which he gives them. So not time here to go through the whole worries about Cyrus and the gift economy, but here we've got a really firm link between good management and good care of the land. If you're working your land, you need to make sure that it's full, that it's planted and productive. The trees are growing and they're bearing fruit, and they should be, and that should be done in a consideration of what the land is capable of doing. So it's not just a question of imposing your will on a piece of land. It's almost a dialogic process. You have to understand the land, understand what it can bear and what it can do, and work cooperatively with it. And that I find really fascinating. Anyway, at the end of this part of the discussion, Critobulus assesses that I think that the king takes care of farming matters no less than military ones. That's 412. And we should see a kind of link between the kind of ordering that is being done by the manager as farmer and a leader as a military leader. Some of the language of cosmos obviously overlaps. So for Xenophon, the idea of cosmos and taxis extends to the ordering of agricultural as well as military arrangements. And there's no doubt among the speakers in this discussion that Cyrus equates both activities. But productive agriculture isn't the only way in which the king concerns himself with nature. Through his development of his own gardens, there's an aesthetic and performative side to his use of the natural world. So after describing Cyrus's oversight of the practical use of land as a resource, Xenophon has Socrates turn to this distinct use in which the natural world becomes a symbol of a kind of aristocratic excellence, a kind of ponos as well as an ergon. In addition to generally caring for the stewardship of resources, Cyrus ensures that the land is used in this distinctive additional way. So in all the places that Cyrus resides and spends time. He ensures that there are this special kind of garden called a paradisos, a paradise, full of all the beautiful and good plants that the earth brings forth. It's in these that he himself spends the most time, except when the season doesn't permit it. So here, I think it's interesting that he does this organizing himself. This is somewhere where he spends time, but it's also a way in which, and this has been a question that I've long been interested in, that the king can transmit his authority across a wide range of lands. So there's a sense in which the paradisos can stand in for Cyrus, even when he's not there and physically present in it. It stands as a symbol and sign of his authority. The Achaemenid royal parks were set up for leisure activities such as hunting, as well as for the enjoyment of plants such as fruit trees. There's evidence from other cultures of the region that such gardens featured plants and animals gathered from across any territory that the ruler held. So they offered a kind of artificial miniature version of the ruler's empire. So again, a kind of microcosmos of the Achaemenid macrocosm. Xenophon, I think, in noting that Cyrus spends time in them, is exploring this significance, and I wonder whether it also contributes to thinking about their religious significance. It's noted that this is, and cultural commentators on these gardens have argued that they have a particular religious significance. So I think that that's something else to think about. And again, I think an interesting way in which Xenophon is bringing a Persian view of the cosmos into his thought and into his thought on how engaging with nature constructs masculine virtue. And I think the last point on this particular quote, it's notable that the plants themselves are Kala Kagatha, that they're beautiful and good, and that their natural connection with the ground is emphasized. Anyway, at this point, the conversation switches to a discussion of the younger Cyrus, and Xenophon presents an anecdote which Socrates attributes to Lysander, the Spartan general, whom the younger Cyrus showed round his paradisos at Sardis. And Lysander is astonished by the sensory experience. And here I think we can see some Xenophon transmitting the ideas and the argument and the experience and the multisensory nature of the anecdote. I think it makes it vivid and lively and adds interest, but also really, I think, makes it just very, very Xenophontic. There's Thalma going on. It's not just the beauty of the trees, it's the way that they've been set out and planted, how straight the rows are, how careful the angles of the rows of planting are, the smells, the pleasure that they bring as you walk through them. All of this highly a highly aesthetic experience, but it's one that really makes clear the role of Cyrus in setting out and planting the whole garden. And Lysander expresses astonishment at the beauty, but also at the work of the person who set it out. So we have Dia Taxantas, perhaps standing in almost for a kind of act of diakosmesis. And Lysander is unsure that Cyrus in his fine clothes could have actually been doing this planting, but it absolutely is the case. I mean, one can wonder whether it actually was, but reality isn't the point here. It's the overall impression that was created. And the conclusion of the anecdote is that in a couple of sections later is that this activity is evidence of good character and has created flourishing, that Cyrus has generated eudaimonia for himself through this activity. So Cyrus and his garden, like other examples in the Oeconomicus, such as the Phoenician ship in chapter 8, or the domestic storage it inspires, emphasize Xenophon's firm belief that proper arrangement is a good in itself, whatever its objects are. And this is a kind of diakosmesis, setting in order, which can encompass many objects from the universe as a whole down to the small scale of the garden, the kitchen storage, the interior of the house. And the natural world can and should be an object of this process, just as an army, a city, or household objects can be. But also, organizing nature aligns with the generative power which underlies masculinity. Cyrus plants his trees and sows his crop using the same verbs, phuteuein, sparein, often used for the procreation of children, an activity which the Greeks often analogize to animal or plant husbandry. And Cyrus thus demonstrates a masculinity which is reinforced by his ordering of the natural world, and the Paradisus offers a material expression of his personal excellence, which people can see, experience thauma, and realize their place in the hierarchy that has been created. And that we might see how this plays out later in the Oeconomicus, in the things that Ischomachus says in thinking about how to achieve excellence in farming, and that involves respecting the capabilities of the land itself. Oh, there is a diagram of the layout of the garden. I will come back to that. Here is Ischomachus on choosing crops. And it's important that anyone who intends to farm successfully must understand the nature of the earth. And he expands the point to say that you need to observe the land, see what crops and what trees grow, and that there is no point fighting the gods and trying to grow things that aren't going to grow in the land that you are working with. It's a mutual activity. The land needs to take pleasure in production just as much as the farmer needs to take hold of managing the planting and sowing. So there's an interesting gender point there with the personified feminine land experiencing pleasure in bringing forth crops, gendered experience being anchored in the macrocosm, the masculine farmer attuned to the feminine land, respecting its capabilities while activating them, and in doing so, becoming aligned with the divine order of the cosmos. And so that alignment seems to activate the generative potential of the land. It produces crops in the same way that the wife within the house bears and nourishes children, as the man moves between the opposed worlds of house and farm, he operates over them in parallel ways, activating their productive capacity. However, the world of the farm and the controlled space of the paradisos doesn't exhaust the possibilities of land. And here I'm going to turn back briefly to thinking about a second model of masculinity, which we find in Xenophon's work, looking at masculinity as a transitional and developing form, where the transition to manhood is an encounter with an untamed part of the world. So in the Cyropedia, the older Cyrus can only become an effective man and leader through escaping the ordered cosmos created by his grandfather Astyages and hunting outside the walled garden of the Paradisos. Rather than creating order, here it's transgressing order that becomes essential. And so we might see perhaps something of the myths of hunting and transition to adulthood, the world of Vidal Naquet's Black Hunter, taking shape in Xenophon's narrative. So at the big picture level, and this is the thing I'm still pondering, is how this works out in the opposition between masculinity as hunting and masculinity as agriculture. Are these alternative or sequential stages, or are they combined in the figure of the hoplite farmer? Does this vision of masculinity as the care of an ordered environment offer a positive and generative account of masculinity to set against the more militaristic and destructive one? And the conclusion I've reached so far is that it seems that you cannot generate you cannot generate hegemonic masculinity in the confines of somebody else's paradisos. You have to go somewhere else to do it. So we see that in Cyrus's story, he had learned to hunt in his grandfather's paradisos, but he got bored with that. He wants to pursue wilder spaces somewhere else and engage with the natural world and dominate its living creatures. So opposing these two spaces of masculinity. And this is my final text, which I think nicely expresses that idea that you cannot become a man in a space that has been created by another man as an expression of his dominant masculinity. The paradisos fails to nourish the masculinity of others, restricting them to activities which mimic rather than achieve domination over nature. And while Xenophon's medium world operates as something of an Orientalist fantasy, I think we can see Xenophon working out some thought through it. And Cyrus's hunting expedition in the wild, where he finally gets to meet real beasts, and ultimately that segues into a real military encounter too, is doing something really important there. So by leaving the Paradisos and going to a liminal region, a Kora, an undefined space, he finds a venue in which he can escape the domination of his elders and establish his own hegemonic masculinity. So in the longer paper, I then turn to Xenophon's Anabasis and consider its entanglement of two conflicts, warfare and man versus the natural world and man. and also think about how Xenophon's journey involves both open spaces and other people's agricultural spaces, the destruction and theft of others' agricultural efforts, as well as the attempt to come to terms with a wild and untamed nature. So I think that's, I'll leave you with the stunning picture of from the British Museum, the Assyrian Royal Lion Hunt frieze. The lion, the symbol of powerful masculinity, and here it has been defeated by human endeavor, as you see from the blood streaming from its wounds and its mouth. So the hunting versus agriculture as sites for the construction of masculinity turns out to be a discussion in which I think Xenophon can give us some interesting examples to pursue. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Carol. What a wonderful and stimulating paper. Let's open the floor to questions. Perhaps I can ask a first one while everyone arranges their thoughts.
Sure.
I was wondering, gosh, it was so stimulating and compelling. But I'm wondering if alongside the hegemonic masculine discourse that you're tracing, I wonder if you'd see any room for more feminine and more non-aristocratic discourses. I mean, as you went along, there were just a few times when I was like, for instance, you talked very nicely about the dialogic dynamic with the land, also kind of showing the farmer what to do. And Socrates in chapter 5 talks about the land as actually, modeling principles, teaching the farmer how to, how to farm the land, as you say, personified feminine. So I wondered if a moment like that is modeling something a little different with a sort of female land actually able to teach, or really having to teach the male farmer. I was also wondering about there's a really kind of striking moment where I think Oeconomicus is talking about what makes like cows and things, like what makes them noble. Or is it maybe it's farming himself? Sorry, it's farming itself. He's talking about what makes it noble, and one of the things that seems to make it noble, Ghanaion, is the fact that it is so easy to learn. That it's sort of this, I mean, this quite surprising idea that like emphasis on the accessibility of farming, when of course in reality this is something that only the rich can own land. So it's this kind of striking emphasis on the nobility of farming is consisting in this, the accessibility of it. And I think there was one other, I think I had potentially one other example of this. Can't see what it was, so I can get back to you about that. So I was wondering, how far? Oh, I know what it was. The wonderful chapter in Memorabilia where Socrates is talking to his ungrateful son about the mother. And she, like the way to which people like Tadzuko van Berkel have argued that the mother there is actually like the quintessential ideal philos, the friend, and this model of friendship is very important to the ideal leader in Xenophon, and her modeling of epimeleia, of the care, the attentiveness, and this kind of moral. So how far do you see, are these competing discourses, or how would you conceptualize this?
I think it's very helpful and useful that Xenophon's discourse incorporates the feminine, and that there is both that dialogic relationship with the land, and that he acknowledges the role of women as nurturers and as instructors and as participants. So I think that there is a way in which Xenophon's work provides almost like a non-toxic version of masculinity, which I think is very helpful and useful. But nonetheless, I think there is a point at which, certainly within the Cyrus anecdotes, that imposition of order is something that's important. And it may be that there are some tensions in Xenophon's thought that aren't thoroughly worked out, because that he's sometimes running multiple models at once that don't necessarily cohere. And while on the one hand he's setting up a kind of top-down exercise of masculine authority, in doing so he's creating a space in which the feminine is playing a big part in that. So I think that's where I would take that, and I think those are really useful points to bring into what I'm doing.
Okay, thank you so much. Thornton, let me hand over to you.
Thank you, Carol. This actually is a follow-up, I think, to what Emily was just thinking. So apropos what you were saying about the creation of Texas and whatnot. So obviously that's going on in the gardens of Cyrus, but in the household, there's all this emphasis of Ischomachus's wife ordering things, like everything's got to be in the right place. I mean, on some level, that's a kind of an efficiency thing. If you need your tool and you can't find it, that's a problem. Yeah. But is that I mean, like insofar as we've got a gender complementarity, the man does the stuff outside the house, organizes the agricultural field, the wife inside the house is coordinating, making sure that everything that is brought in has its own place. Are those parallel? Do they pick up on this question of a kind of environmental order both within and without the household?
I started off thinking of them as being very opposed spaces, but I think that, there's a sense that it is, I mean, literally the man who is doing the sowing and planting in both spaces. He's planting plants outside and children inside. So I think that it's a bit more complicated than that. And of course, Ischomachus has taught his wife where to put everything based on his own principles. So I think again, it's that idea of a strict binary space kind of collapses under examination, but nonetheless, what you do see is this idea of masculine authority remaining within it. So that's kind of what one of the things that I'm interested in. Say sometimes Xenophon, you think, oh, Xenophon is setting up a clear opposition here, and then it kind of comes apart in your hands a bit. So that's, I think that's my thought there. I think that it's important, one should not let go of the idea that although the wife is running the interior space, but she's a satrap. She's not effectively. she's not a king, and I say that there's a sense in which
she is a queen. I mean,
she is a queen.
She's a queen.
But that's not the same thing as a king.
Edith has her hand up. I'll hand over to Edith.
Hi, hello. I'm
Hi.
not sure exactly. Thank you so much for that paper. And I just have a sort of general contextual question. So there is this alpha male behavior of ravaging land, right? Xerxes ravages his way across Greece and so on and so forth. And to your point, sort of related to what you've been saying, is just that is, I think, even if you are intending to punish another side severely, whether it's Greek on Greek or Persian on Greek, it is intended to be temporary. Either, the Persians intended to take over Greece and farm it themselves, right? And Xerxes was induced to head out on this invasion by, lies about how fertile Greece was and so on and so forth. So either you want to do that, or you actually intend for the people who presently possess the land simply to farm it again after you've punished them enough. And it just it's kind of the opposite masculinity, sort of this alpha male coming in and wrecking everything in a way, but then there is also the other side that you are intending to farm it afterwards, or someone is intended to farm it afterwards. I'm not sure how this thought relates.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because that, the moment of, so I mean, I think I'd focus on the action of ravaging the land as opposed, the act of taking rather than the act of planting, which I think are kind of conceptually opposed. And I'm still thinking about how that works in the Anabasis, where raiding other people's farmed land is, how they manage to find anything to eat and survive. But it's clearly, it's a tool of war, it's an act of war. So it's an act of at least attempted domination.
Right. I mean, Agathocles makes a big point, actually, doesn't he, of ravaging. Is it Artabanus paradises in Hellenica?
Right.
Right. And Artabanus then accuses him, what did I ever do to you that you should wreck my gardens and so on and so forth. So they have to have a little, they have a little discourse about the gardens themselves. That as I say, I haven't thought this through at all. I'm not sure how all these things relate.
But yeah, I mean, wrecking somebody's paradisos seems like a very pointed act of aggression.
And Pharnabasdus also relates that to, the idea of the philia that should have been there. Yeah. Do we have further comments or questions? I have one further little follow-up, Carol, just to follow up on what you said about Oeconomicus. I thought it was quite funny the way you formulated it, planting trees outside and children within the household. What do you make of the fact that it seems, or it's in the couple's future, the fact that they will have children, but it strikes me that there's very little emphasis on that in the Economicus. There's very, very little emphasis. It's the wife. She's more a companion in other ways, like in helping to, educate the slaves and in these other ways, but not so much emphasis on her as producer of children.
Yeah, I mean, I'm given that, the Economicus isn't, a huge, I'd be very loath to give that any weight as something that has been deliberately left out. It's not the focus. And as you said, there are other places where Xenophon speaks very in great detail about maternity. The chapter from the Memorabilia, I think, yeah, that was a good thing to bring in. So I'm not sure that I would, I think it would be a bit Straussian to make a lot out of that not being a focus. I wouldn't see it as that significant. I mean, it is perhaps a little bit odd given that, what is the point of marriage in the ancient world? It's producing producing people to transmit your property to. It's, that's, not just maintaining the property in your own life, but creating a successors for it. So perhaps that is a gap in Xenophon's thought.
So I suppose in that way you could see him as, yeah, focusing on these other dimensions
Yeah.
of the wife, which are quite striking in a way. Any more comments or questions?
Emily, just a very quick on your point. I'm thinking, like, where do we hear about the raising of children? And it's always within the framework of the public education, whether that's in the laws or at the end of politics or in the Republic. But I take it because Xenophon's not thinking of public education. He's thinking of, again, the traditional oikonomia paideia that's taking place, again, with a mother and a father. Whereas, again, like that, I mean, it's not there in the oikonomia literature, at least in Aristotle or Plato, as far as I can see either. It's just, it gets subsumed within a public framework.
Yeah, so say a bit more about how you think, I mean, whose paideia are we thinking about here? You've lost me a little bit.
Sorry, it's late in the afternoon, so if we can take a break from it. It
Yeah.
was thinking of contrast between what you find with respect to the emphasis on child rearing within the Oeconomicus, and what I'm thinking of what you find either in the laws or if you find in when Aristotle talks about the upbringing of children. It's you don't talk about it in a private setting, but you can expand upon it within a public setting of public education. That's what I'm thinking of.
I mean, Plato has views about what should be happening in the phase of children's lives when they live in a women's world. So, I mean, it is a gendered thing where the management of children starts off in a very female-dominated space, one of the mother, the nurse, old women telling them bad stories that they shouldn't believe. And then they move into progressively more masculine spaces for education. So there is a kind of gendered aspect to the kind of progress of the child's life in both in actual Athens and in imaginary worlds like Plato's, for example. I mean, like as in Magnesia or even in Callipolis, there's a point where the children are necessarily being cared for almost entirely by women. So, I think that is another way in which, there's an aspect of the production of children that has to be ceded to women. And I guess I need to think about how that fits in.
Thanks.
Well, I think this might be a good note on which to end. Thank you so much again to our speakers. These were just wonderful talks, extremely stimulating, wonderful talks. I feel like I've learned a great deal. So I hope everyone has a lovely rest of the day or evening. Thank you for coming. And
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank
we'll
you.
all be in touch soon, I hope. Thank you
Thanks.
again.
Yep, so too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.